Hello and welcome back to yet another episode of the People's Wrestling Podcast. Joined as always by Ali and Matt. Guys, what's going on?
Not a lot. Don't know if you've heard, but there's a lockdown going on.
Yeah, I think we could probably record a single clip of how we're doing and just play that after during every episode because it's probably going to be the same answer.
Yeah.
Matt, you slightly less groggy this week?
Yeah, a little bit, but not in a better mood. Just below.
Well, hopefully, hopefully this episode will cheer you up. I'm going to start on a bit of a downer. Just quickly before we get onto our main topic, being the randomizer, we have to talk about it. The despise of the Undisputed Era. Despise? Demise, even. I'm so devastated that I can't even speak.
I'm quite happy.
What do we think of it?
I'm quite happy. Yeah.
That surprises me.
I think it's going to just lead to some seriously good matches.
Yeah, I think that's a given. I think there's been a large portion of people who are quite upset that we're never going to get to see them, well, at least not in the immediate future, on the main roster together, which kind of seemed to be something that a lot of people were looking forward to in the last 2 years or so. Ali, what do you think?
I kind of agree with Matt. I think just looking forward to Kyle O'Reilly versus Adam Cole. I think that would be a fantastic match. I sincerely hope that it can happen in front of people, in front of a crowd, at least more than they have at the CWC. But even if it doesn't, it'll still be fantastic. But yeah, it is a shame to not have them on the main roster. But who's to say that won't happen one day?
Yeah, I'm sure there's always the possibility of them coming back together. It's a shame for me. They had gone a little bit stale, especially as kind of although it was interesting to see them as a face group, they'd kind of done everything that they could do in NXT, and it just seemed like an inevitability, just a waiting game for them to come up. But
it keeps it fresh, doesn't it?
Yeah, not going to happen in the short term. I don't know. I'd be shitting myself if I was Bobby Fish.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure the other three will be fine, but I know he is older than the rest, so maybe he might start moving into a bit more of a kind of coaching role at the PC or something. But yeah, bit of a shame, but also it's part of wrestling, isn't it? It's just what happens with groups. We'll see where it goes. I'm excited for the matches, but yeah, sad about the demise. Unexpected as well for me, anyway. Right, let's get on to the meat of this episode, what we come here for, which is the randomizer. So, for those of you who didn't...
We have no idea.
yeah, we have no idea what's going to happen.
So for those of you who didn't see last week's episode, we...
Firstly, shame on you.
Yes, of course, go back and check it out in the archives.
Is it on YouTube, though?
Yeah.
I couldn't find it today.
That's definitely on there. So this is our last upload.
The last video on there is the Royal Rumble.
No, it's definitely on there. I had a look earlier, 46 minutes. Anyway, it's definitely on YouTube. If you can't find it on YouTube, it's on Spotify, iTunes, SoundCloud, etc. So what we did last week was each of us brought to the table about 6 or 7 topics and loaded them into a randomizer. These topics range from specific wrestlers to pay-per-views to general topics. And what we're going to do now, or in the next minute or two, is we're going to spin the randomizer that Ali is in control of. And whatever topic it lands on, that's what we're talking about for the rest of this episode.
Unless it's really shit and then we'll bypass it.
Hey, no skipping.
Unless it's The Rock and then I'm just going to log out of this call.
That's the thing, we all pre-agreed on these topics, so there should be no surprises.
Well, I didn't agree to it. It was kind of just brought up and we said, I never agreed to The Rock one.
You did, and you said you'd give your fair perspective of The Rock. So
I won't give it fair. It was just definitely biased.
All right, well... Ali, if you would like to
I'll do the honours.
Open up the randomizer. You should see it on the screen. So for those of you who are only listening and not watching, then you won't see anything. You don't think you'll hear anything either, but you'll hear us react to it, and then we'll tell you what it lands on, obviously. Oh.
There we go. You can see my little face there.
How old's that
See your
picture?
Babyface, yeah. That was actually only 2 weeks ago, just without his beard.
Catfish.
Now I just have to figure out how I did it last week.
You hit the share screen option.
Share screen button.
No rehearsals here on the PWP, guys. It's just how we do things. We don't even have a topic for the episode.
Hey, here we go.
Here we go. Ali Bunker is presenting.
Ooh, look at that.
Here we go. It might be a little laggy, so it might not visually look great, but you'll at least see what it lands on. So we're not. You can see we're not lying to you. So, Ali, if you'd like to do the honours.
Spin
the wheel.
Okay. No, there goes the Facebook chat. Let's spin the wheel.
Here we go. We're spinning. We've got 21 topics in total. As I said, they're various different ones. And it's it's landed on Eddie Guerrero.
Latino Heat.
So
Ala Achi Astil.
So this is one that we said last week would be quite an interesting one to talk about, because over the past 90 odd episodes that we've done on the podcast, where we generally talk about modern day WWE, Eddie Guerrero is obviously sadly not with us anymore. So we don't really tend to get a lot of time to speak about him, unless it's to do with perhaps Sasha Banks and the kind of people who he is an idol to. So yeah, let's talk about Eddie Guerrero. Let's start with, what are some of your kind of overriding memories and feelings of Eddie Guerrero and his time in WWE and his legacy, really? We'll kind of start with a big one to begin with.
My memories, No Way Out, him winning the title for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
It was the first
the
time.
Only time.
Yeah. That was probably, at the time, you thought going at Brock Lesnar, probably not going to win.
A month before Mania as well. You don't tend to get a lot of title changes.
I can remember the celebrations the night after, or the SmackDown after, which were really good.
Mm-hmm.
His legacy, I see it as his second time round was definitely his better time. I mean, his first time, I don't know if they knew where to go with his gimmick or what to do with him. But the second time, they definitely hit a home run, and I think he'll be remembered as one of the best cruiserweight / sort of heavyweights there ever will be.
I think he's one of those great examples of someone who learned how to work in a cruiserweight style because of his size, but then beefed up and transitioned into a heavyweight division. It's something that I think a lot of people, specifically in places like New Japan, where they have those separate divisions, more so than in WWE, that people make quite a big deal of doing. That wrestlers make a big deal of doing, like people like Will Ospreay, for instance, comes to mind, who made that sort of transition from junior heavyweight to heavyweight, if you will. I think he's just a perfect example of someone who did it so effortlessly, and it just sort of happened in front of our eyes without really, ever being any sort of fuss about it.
Yeah. There wasn't an announcement that Eddie Guerrero is now going to wrestle the bigger guys.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that part of that is, at the time there was a lot of big guys, and Brock Lesnar was one that he was coming up against, for example. You don't get a lot bigger than him at that sort of time. So yeah, I think he's a great example of someone who learned the trade in an in-ring style in such a fantastic way, and then transitioned over to a main event character, which in my eyes is the best way around to do it.
Well, I think it's quite fitting that he was probably one of the best wrestlers in WCW, and they didn't know what to do with him, because you had your Hulk Hogan, your Kevin Nash, your Goldbergs, who were main event stars, and they weren't ever going to be anything less than that.
I don't know if he was one of the group of vanilla midgets that got kind of labelled on them by the likes of Kevin
But you
Nash
look
as wrestlers, but nothing to
the wrestlers
nothing
they
to
had.
watch.
They had Jericho. They had Dean Malenko. They had Eddie Guerrero. They had Chris Benoit. All of them have gone on to have great careers. Probably not Dean Malenko as much, but he was a great wrestler.
He's still
look at
widely
their careers.
he's still very well revered in the
Regarded,
wrestling
yeah.
industry, and he's kind
If
of the
WCW
insider's favourite wrestler.
knew what to do with talent, they would have probably won the Monday Night Wars.
But they'd still be here, let's put it that way.
Yeah, I think so. Eddie Guerrero for me is one of few people who was kind of as effective as a heel as he was as a babyface, and his heel. It was kind of, it started around that era where his heel characteristics became the likable things, as we started to see with the likes of Stone Cold and The Rock and stuff before, where being the kind of the badass is more popular. Whereas with Eddie Guerrero, he wasn't such a badass, but he was just such a lovable kind of guy. Even when he was being a bit of a scumbag, he just made you laugh. He made you want to watch him. So that transition from heel into that kind of babyface tag team with Chavo, kind of back to heel again, and then face for his title run, and then heel towards the end of his career. It was just like, it was all seamless and it flowed all the way throughout. But it was effective either way. Never felt like he was shoehorned into either one of the roles.
His gimmick with China is underrated. Them two together made really good. They were a really good pair.
And it brought out a lot in China as well.
Yeah, it brought out her character.
I know we'd had similar with Mark Henry in the past, but it was kind of an extra layer on top for when it was with Guerrero.
I think it really helped him in his character as well, because that turned him into Latino heat.
Yeah, and I think it's that only started within a handful of months after he and the Radical debuted, and as part of being a WWE performer, generally to be successful, you need to be good in the non-wrestling stuff, the promos and the segments and all that kind of stuff. And I think to stick him in that straight away, lets personality come through, which I think was aided by the fact that he got injured on the first night or second night or whatever it was, broke his arm, so couldn't wrestle. I think that definitely helped him in perhaps like Vince's eyes or the higher ups' eyes, that they could do something with him.
I mean the Radicals. I mean, 3 great performers and Perry Saturn.
Well, let's talk about the Radicals. So they all came in together: Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, Perry Saturn, and Dean Malenko, all together for roughly about 6 months or so. Didn't have the greatest success as a group, really. They tend to get beat quite a lot, which doesn't usually happen from like a big
I think
debut.
because they were seen as WCW guys. I think that's why they lost a lot.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that was the reason. But at the time, Chris Benoit was the world heavyweight champion, wasn't he?
I believe so.
He just won the title like the week before, and then was appearing on WWE programming in the crowd, and then hopped over the barrier and beat up the New Age Outlaws. So it's quite like, it doesn't necessarily feel like it looking back at it, but at the time, it must have been a big kind of acquisition and a big thing for the crowd that the WCW World Champion is now on Raw.
But it can't really get much bigger, can it? I mean, no. when you talk about switching,
in terms of name value, perhaps, but in terms of the literal championship holder, like that was the dreaded nightmare that Bret Hart would do over to WCW, that he'd turn up, but with the title, which Benoit didn't do. But it's kind of unfathomable in a way. They'd be like The Rock just turning up on Nitro.
Well, that would never have happened. But no, it was a big deal. And I remember, and Aidan, you're probably a bit too young for this, but Matt and I will remember Radicals debuting on Raw. And even though I was more of a WCW guy in the early to mid 90s. I never was a WCW fan, but I watched it when it was filmed at Disney Studios back in the day. And then when Nitro sort of came up against Raw, I was always a Raw guy. I think we both were, Matt.
Yeah, definitely.
We didn't do a lot of channel hopping. It wasn't easy to do it, to be fair, in the UK. I don't think it was particularly easy anyway.
I don't even remember what Nitro was on in the UK.
I think it was on Bravo. But
I think it was on Bravo,
remember.
and then didn't it go to Channel 5?
I think so, yeah. But I mean,
on a Friday night.
I think at that age, sort of 9, 10, 11, I wasn't in charge of the remote anyway, so I was never switching that channel. But I remember when they debuted, and even though, I knew who all of them were, I remember being most excited about Chris Benoit because, as you say, he was making his way up the ranks in WCW, and he ultimately got there. And then it was Eddie Guerrero. Yeah, and then it was Eddie Guerrero for me. And I always remember getting the feeling, because I'd done the rounds, not on the internet, because we didn't really have the internet back then. Crazy. But I just, you just hear about, probably in Power Slam magazine, a lot of stuff with Eddie Guerrero and Eric Bischoff, how that sort of storyline played out and really crossed over between kayfabe and reality. And I was excited about Eddie Guerrero as an in-ring performer because at that time in WWF, there wasn't a lot like him. Who could do it?
Yeah, there wasn't. Because, the cruiserweight division in WWE at the time was poor. Like, there was only, 2 or 3 guys, weren't there, that were ever going to win the title.
Exactly, yeah.
I was really excited because on where I'd been watching it on Channel 5, the more that they showed was the likes of Rey Mysterio, Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit. I think it was the lower card of matches that they were showing more. And actually, the wrestling was outstanding. And so for them coming across, it was a little bit like, I don't know. But then I was like, I don't know where they're going to fit in.
Yeah, a little bit like that. I mean, this was kind of, so Jericho, I think, kind of kick-started that sort of migration over, and that was in, summer 99, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Around August time. And then obviously this is about 5 or 6 months later. So, they were still very early in that transition period between, stars moving from WCW to WWE rather than what we'd had 5 years before, which was, big stars moving from WWF to WCW, like Hall and Nash and Hogan and Savage, etc., etc. So it felt like at that point, WCW was a sinking ship. WWE had won the war, which we know obviously by that point they pretty much had, and ultimately, but in a year's time, would completely have done it. And at the time, it felt like you don't really get 4 people debuting on one night, especially big stars.
That's the thing. A whole group of people coming across in one night, including the world champion. It just didn't happen.
Yeah, it's fits and spurts. It's happened since, and most notably, I think NXT call-ups that went down a storm in Lafayette in New Orleans a couple of years back. But this felt like a big deal, and I think the commentators made a big deal out of it on Raw when they were seeing. They were sort of like, "What are these guys doing here?" Which is exactly how it should have been played out. So I think they booked it really, really well. Just one thing I would say is what happened with Eddie is if you look back through his career, is what's happened a fair amount of times is he just got very unlucky.
With injuries.
And got injured. There was in WCW, there was I think a storyline with they formed the LWO. I think that's the Latino World Order, I think. And they were in a storyline in a feud, and then Eddie Guerrero was in a car crash, and that was the end of that storyline, and that would kind of that kind of defined his career up to a stage where he would just get to a point, things would go well, and then he'd have a major setback. And obviously that's something that would carry on, unfortunately. For the rest of his career.
Had a lot of issues, obviously, in the WWE with drugs and with drink as well, which didn't. But then when he got fired and come back, apparently he was clean and sober until he died.
Yeah, that was part of his kind of redemption arc, and through a solo run was how getting laid off basically he used that time to fix himself and become better and become clean and sober and all that kind of stuff. So,
but he did the right things. He went and did independent shows and showed WWE what they were missing, and they ultimately were looking at him and signed him back.
Yeah, I don't think he was only gone for about 6 months to less than a year. I think he got fired and rehired in the same year, in 2002. So, they obviously, when they let him go, it was. I would imagine it was more of a case of go sort yourself out, and the door's always open, which I think was the right decision in the end, because it turned out quite well in kind of the short term.
I also think he was fundamental in the brand split in making SmackDown one of the best shows to watch.
Yeah, I literally what I was just about to say.
I think the whole SmackDown 6 thing was a very real thing. They were dragging SmackDown up from the B show to the A show, and there was absolutely no doubt that from an in-ring perspective, SmackDown was the better show at that point, and it was largely down to himself, Ray, Edge, Kurt, Chavo, and Chris Benoit as well.
Yeah.
Because of those, and what can you say about someone's ability when they take a show like Raw, or they overtake a show like Raw, which has been the main flagship show of WWE for so many years, and to
take the mantelpiece from you just having the likes of The Rock are leaving, Stone Cold's leaving, so they're two massive names, and then you're trying to fit yourselves into them slots, and they did it really well.
Yeah, I do remember, there being a significant drop off in main events quality stars, which I think is something that WWE have struggled with for a long, long time, almost ever since, really. They've tried, at that time anyway, they were trying to inject a bit of youth into the main event scene, at least not necessarily youth, because actually a lot of those guys weren't at the start of their careers. They were seasoned veterans by that point, almost all of them, with the exception of maybe Kurt Angle. And they were trying to inject that just bit of energy, a bit of difference into the main event scene. And Eddie was, a huge benefactor of that.
Yeah, and it went hand in hand with.
Sorry. Where I live is a daily occurrence.
That's the wood for you.
That's pouring wood for you.
Yeah, like the rise of these kind of perhaps more experienced, more capable, but perhaps fresher faces, combined with the likes of Brock Lesnar's, Randy Orton's, and Batista's, and John Cena's, really helped, I think, SmackDown and WWE really in creating a decent number of pretty large stars, I think you could say, in the likes of Batista and Cena in particular. And yeah, I think it was crucial for SmackDown's, I guess, perhaps survival as a brand on its own, to have these kind of core group that are gonna steal the show, regardless of whatever combination of them you put together.
You just know that they're going to deliver night upon night, and you can put them out there with whoever you wanted to. Yeah,
so if you have one or two of these matches on the card where you just know they're going to deliver, that people are going to want to watch, then you can introduce the likes of your Lesnar's and stuff like that to get more eyes on him, because people are watching to see the good wrestling. So yeah, I think that was kind of crucial in the first 6 months to a year of SmackDown's solo existence.
I think this was the point as well where people were looking for wrestling rather than your gimmicks. We'd just come out of the Attitude Era. We'd just come out of all the gimmicky matches and stuff, and people wanted to see wrestling. Fundamentally,
yeah, it's the rise of people who are kind of almost exclusively watching stuff like Ring of Honor or New Japan or PWG at the time. So yeah, there'd be a bleeding through or bleed over into watching the kind of And you still have it today with people who maybe only watch NXT or maybe only watch certain parts of Raw and SmackDown because they know the matches are going to be good rather than watching the whole thing.
Talking of bleeding, he had one of the bloodiest matches I have ever seen in my life because he cut himself a little bit too deep.
Yes, I don't think you can ever question Eddie Guerrero's toughness and his guts, which I think we almost literally saw.
His commitment to the cause.
So yeah, if you don't remember, Judgment Day 2004, I think it was Judgment Day, and the Last Man Stand. Was it Last Man Standing? No, I think it was just a
No holds barred, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it was just like a no disqualification type match. But yeah, Eddie Guerrero gets cracked on the cranium by a steel chair thrown by JBL, cuts himself and basically goes far too deep and is just gushing all over them. It's horrible to watch, like, because it's instant as well. You can see it squirted. Like, you could tell listening to Michael Cole and Taz on commentary just how kind of uncomfortable. Like, you could tell they were kind of concerned.
You're basically waiting for him to faint.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing. And what's amazing about it is there's about 10 minutes after it happens of the match. It's not right near the end. There's about 10 minutes where, like, he's getting the shit beaten out of him by JBL. Like, he can barely stand. You can't really tell if it's part of the match or if it's just because he literally can barely stand. And then he goes on this recovery and this rally, and he's doing all of it. And I think stuff like this, which although he was champion at the time, massively helps endear him to a crowd, is you can see he's losing a ridiculous amount of blood, and he's getting beaten up by JBL, and he's doing the chest shimmy thing. I don't know what you call it, but he's making his comeback, and the crowd are going nuts. And eventually, I think he gets disqualified or something like that for going over the top. But yeah, there's never any question that he is ever going to pull out of a match. Because I definitely wouldn't have blamed him.
I wonder how close they were to stopping that match.
You just got to look at the mat. There's more blood than mat. It was ridiculous.
He did actually pass out backstage after that match, and was taken.
I heard that.
Because he was, obviously in a pretty bad way. The explanation was that he cut an artery.
Yeah.
Where he cut himself too deep. And yeah, you're right. He lost that match by disqualification.
I'm not being funny. If I cut an artery, I'm going straight to hospital. I'm not carrying on for 10
But sorry, guys, I've done a bit too much. I'm just going to... Yeah, fuck that.
That was actually a feud. I think, sorry, just to interrupt you. I think the JBL feud is one that you immediately think of when you think of Eddie Guerrero's title reign. But actually, I think it did a lot for JBL as well as what it did for Eddie. And that's the sign of a really good feud, because it didn't come out with Eddie Guerrero looking great and JBL looking rubbish, or vice versa. It actually came out with both of them looking like stars. So it was an excellent feud.
Yeah. And that's a good point, because it was JBL's first solo feud as the JBL character, and for him to go in and win the title.
It made JBL the character what he was.
And yeah, it was the perfect character for JBL to go up against, not just because he was the WWE champion, but because of the whole racial undertones thing of JBL perhaps not liking the Mexican or Latino community.
Unfounded rumor, surely. Unfounded rumor, surely.
Yeah, just speculation. But it's a good point. It definitely helped integrate JBL as pretty quickly establish him as a main event character who could then go on a title run, which would be at the time the longest of that title's reign, I think. Well,
one question I've got about it: what do you think would have happened if he hadn't have died?
This is something that I always wonder. I know the rumor and the plan supposedly was that it was supposed to be him versus Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania the next year, 22, which I think was something that we never really got to see at least not in a program. I don't know if they ever had like a one-off kind of Raw type match, but that's the kind of confirmed rumor or plans for the time, but I don't know in the kind of short term. I think he was supposed to feud with Batista over the winter for the title.
Yeah, I always feel it's strange with Eddie because obviously sort of towards after sort of the JBL feud, JBL moved on to John Cena, at WrestleMania or whatever. I didn't really see where Eddie Guerrero fit in the main event scene, so to speak, after that. Just because his feuds at that point had been, all very sort of personal. I think the Brock one sort of came out of nowhere a little bit, but the JBL one was very personal. I think he's even had his mum having a kayfabe heart attack or something at a live show or something like that.
I don't think it was kayfabe. I think it was legit.
It's very good timing. Plays into the feud very well.
I think it was I think it was planned that he would do something, but she actually had like a mini heart attack.
Wow. But once sort of Cena was champion, I didn't really see where Eddie fitted in, and then obviously you had the rise of Batista and Orton as well after that. Well, before that slightly, and I felt like Eddie was sort of out of place at the very top of the card. So in my eyes, Eddie's future in the WWE was sort of upper mid card and always floating around that sort of title scene, but never really being the top guy anymore, because it felt like his time had come and gone as the top guy.
Yeah, I don't ever really see him as having won the title again, or was going to win a title again. Would maybe feud for it a couple of times or challenge for it a couple of times, but would never really achieve it. I think what we did see after his kind of 2004 run was, and which is something I think would go on to happen. It would be a similar kind of thing with Shawn Michaels after his return in his second run. You get the more personal storylines like we got with the whole Rey Mysterio, Dominic Mysterio type thing, which sometimes maybe be a bit hokey, but is definitely well remembered. And the feud itself and the heel turn where he destroys Rey Mysterio on the steps.
It's definitely remembered because that is all people remember Dominic from.
It's hard to watch Dominic these days. It's mental the fact that Dominic is now just wrestling every week and had an Elimination Chamber qualifier the other day. It's mental to watch him wrestling every week, but it's also hard to watch him wrestle and not just think of Eddie Guerrero.
Yeah, I think that moves. I think that sort of moves us on to the conversation about his legacy quite well. In that, Rey Mysterio, star in his own right, but in terms of his WWE career, that took off after Eddie's death, with the Royal Rumble win and then WrestleMania moment, obviously. And then obviously you've got Dominic, as you've just mentioned. But I think in terms of more of his legacy would be how so many people have come out and mentioned how inspiring he was as an in-ring performer to them. I mean, Sasha Banks is the big one. I'm sure Bayley has mentioned how she feels the same way as well. It's interesting, actually. And Peyton Royce. It's interesting that these are women coming out and saying that he was an inspiration. You would expect that maybe they might look traditionally, for instance, but Eddie as an inspiration is really interesting.
They're not only are they women, but they're not necessarily Latino women who you probably maybe would expect as the kind of first group of ones to be inspired.
But I suppose growing up, they were seeing wrestling.
Yeah.
So they were the first people you're going to see that are proper wrestling.
But when you think of, say, Rey Mysterio, for example, the people who tend to come out and say Rey Mysterio is one of their favourites or inspirations or whatever, they tend to be the lucha style wrestlers and the ones who've come from Mexico and that part of the world. Whereas with Eddie Guerrero, it seemed that he had a bit more of a kind of global appeal.
Well, I think he'd taken lucha and then adapted it and made it his own. Whereas I can see Rey Mysterio is very much like every lucha there's ever been. He's very much of that.
And I think the Eddie Guerrero not wearing a mask probably plays a part in that. I think if he was a masked wrestler in WWE, whether he would have had the success or not is one thing, but the impact he might have had in certain different demographics and communities would probably be different. I wanted to get your opinion on something that I was listening to on another podcast earlier about Eddie Guerrero, which was after he died and Rey Mysterio had won the Royal Rumble. At No Way Out 2006, Rey Mysterio had a match with Randy Orton, where if Randy beat Mysterio, then Mysterio loses the WrestleMania spot and Randy gets it. The build-up to this featured a very controversial comment from Randy, which he was instructed to do, just off the cuff, where he basically said that Eddie Guerrero is not looking down on you from heaven, he's not very proud of you or whatever, because Eddie Guerrero is in hell. What's your opinions on stuff like that being used as a story or a way to further a storyline and get cheap heat? Or is it just too distasteful, especially so soon after?
I mean, for me, I think cheap heat would be the way to describe it. I mean, generally speaking, I've never really had too much of an issue with these sorts of things. You know, Randy at the time, and pretty much ever since, has been a despicable heel. Like, you know, he's an expert at getting heat, always has been. And I think at the time, Vicky Guerrero was working for the company.
Yeah, I was going to say, if they got her okay on it, then
yeah, they ran everything by her. There's nothing that went out to do with Eddie Guerrero after his death didn't go out without Vicky's.
I look at it this
go
way.
Ahead.
Would Eddie Guerrero have been all right with it for the business? Yeah, he would.
Well, that's one thing that I found quite interesting. Was there was a story that came out after from Mick Foley. So Mick Foley, at the time that episode of SmackDown aired, he was doing like a Make-A-Wish type thing with a young Mexican Latino kid in hospital who was ill, and they were in the hospital room and they were watching that episode of SmackDown, and Eddie Guerrero was this kid's favorite wrestler, and Randy Orton comes out with this line, and Mick Foley saw how upset it made this kid, and felt terrible the fact that the company that he was representing to be there with this kid was also the same company that was putting this thing out on TV. From what Mick Foley then went and did, because he was hearing about people saying, oh, like, Eddie'd be okay with it and all that kind of stuff. And what Mick Foley went and did was that he didn't want anyone to be saying that after he died. He didn't want kind of memorial hardcore shows to be put on or anything like that, or for his death to be used in storyline. So he put it in his will that he changed his will so that if he dies, it's not to be used in any kind of wrestling capacity, which I think is pretty interesting because I've not heard of that before.
Yeah, I mean, I heard the story as well this week, and it was the first time I'd heard it. But, you know, it doesn't surprise me that Mick would have that kind of reaction. He's a very he's a guy of integrity, isn't he, Mick Foley? Integrity is a massive thing for Mick, and yeah, I can understand why he would feel that way. And you know, with the experience of going through with that Make-A-Wish child, with seeing the pain that sort of caused, I can understand. I think in Eddie Guerrero's specific situation, I mean, obviously we've spoken about his legacy on non-Latino wrestlers in the future, but as I would imagine, not being from the Latino community, that he would be a big idol for the Latino community wrestling fans anyway. And, maybe having that sort of phrase and muttered during a storyline would have had massively negative consequences for the people, young Latino fans, and even older ones as well, who were massive Eddie fans. So I can see why people had a issue with it. Personally, I didn't and still wouldn't, but I can certainly see why. And for someone like Mick Foley, who worked for WWE on and off for so many years, and obviously has a great deal of respect for the company and the fans, to do something like that, that really suggests that at some point it really crossed the line with certain people.
Yeah. Matt, any thoughts?
It's a difficult one because it's if he's okayed it with the fact, like, if Vince has okayed that with the family, then that's the family's call. It's not. I mean, he wouldn't have put it on TV if the family had said no. I know Vince is a dick, but I don't think he's that much of a dick. It's weird, isn't it? It's tough
weird. It's weird to think about the real life death of a person being used to further a fake feud between characters.
But then that person was in the industry. That person was part of the industry. That person also got cheap heat from things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm of the same opinion of Ali in that personally it doesn't bother me, but obviously I wasn't not directly impacted in it. I didn't know the person. I'm not part of the company. I'm like,
I think it's different if it's they're saying that about your brother, your dad. Yeah,
and I think it also depends how it's done as well. Randy Orton then came out, I think, the following week and basically said, like, I didn't really mean it. I just used it to go right into this match,
which I think was probably due to the backlash that they probably got from the community.
I think I read that Randy wasn't particularly comfortable with saying it in the first place.
I mean, someone who also knew Eddie, and
wasn't there a thing? Oh, it was Paige, wasn't it, that said about Charlotte's
brother, yeah. Yeah, you had stuff like that, and then you also
that's an example of something that probably crossed the line for me personally.
Yeah, and then you had like Paul Bearer's death being used in a feud with Undertaker almost immediately after, which again everyone says, "Oh yeah, you would have loved it." Like they even put that in the Paul Bearer episode on the network they did, but yeah, it's always one of those areas where it's going to divide opinion regardless of who it is or what they say. It's just, if you're going to do it,
the thing is,
right?
Like, wrestling's fake.
How dare you?
But it's storyline, isn't it? It's not. I mean, there's a touch of realism in it, but you're not gonna come away from a Raw and be like, "Oh, he said that, Jesus, I can't cope now." You take it with a pinch of salt.
Yeah, I think it all depends on the kind of person you are and the kind of things you're watching for. Like, who knows? Maybe if I was sitting there watching it with my son or something, I might have a different view on it. But yeah, so it doesn't bother me. But I can understand why it bothers some people. So I just wanted to end on kind of a bit more about perhaps his legacy and overall kind of career. It's quite strange and it's quite rare, and it only really happened with Owen Hart at the time, for someone to have died in the middle of them being kind of not necessarily the top guy, but being at the top of their game. The height of their career was still some years left. It doesn't tend to happen a lot. That was what made me so sad at the time.
Yeah, I mean, we've spoken about it before, I think, even on here, that, as you were, 10 years old? Mm-hmm. So, very young. Yeah, you were devastated.
Last times I cried, by the way.
Me, myself, I would have been 17 at the time, I think, as almost an adult. I was sort of transitioning away from wrestling at that point, but it was still hit hard, and obviously the tribute shows and all that, they hit hard. I was never an Eddie Guerrero mark, so to speak. I always appreciated his in-ring talent, but I was more of a, I don't know, I think I was stuck in the Attitude Era. So that's kind of transitioning away, but it's definitely hit hard.
Yeah, no, I was an adult. Yeah, no, it was a hard one. I think him dying, and then quickly after Benoit. I mean, obviously for the circumstances, Benoit will probably never have an episode on Benoit because of it. But their legacies they went like that, and then obviously Benoit for what he did.
They'll always be intertwined. I think what was sad and what was weird for me was the tribute episode. Just seeing seemingly how much everybody loved Eddie Guerrero, and just seeing how I know obviously it was like on the day of or the day after he died, but just seeing how destroyed Benoit, for example, was. I always wonder how much of an effect that had on what was then to come in the next
massively
18 months.
Because if you watch that documentary on Benoit, it massively affected him.
Yeah,
that was the saddest. Obviously, the death of his wife and child, very, very sad. But for me, that part of the documentary was the saddest part. Just seeing how destroyed he was. Obviously, great friends and work colleagues, and they've been through some really great times together always. To lose almost like a family member like that, it was really sad to see how much that impacted him. Whether that played a part in what happened after, I don't know, but I can only speculate. But yeah, Chris Benoit after that would never have been the same.
Yeah, I mean it's obviously not an easy thing for anyone to go through to lose their best friend so unexpectedly and then suddenly. And yeah, hearing the likes of Chavo Guerrero in his interview saying how he basically held Eddie Guerrero's lifeless body in his arms is just not something that you ever really want to think about. So I think the overriding memories that everyone has of Eddie Guerrero is the happy memories, the way he made the way, just the connection he had with the crowd. It was very early kind of instance of the likes of, I guess, Daniel Bryan, who you would imagine they were never really going to reach the top, but they just had such a connection and such backing with the crowd, from the crowd, that it became kind of undeniable in the end.
Yeah, it's certainly one of the prime examples of that fan movement. WWE listening to the crowd and reacting and making, maybe making a change in plans about, who they put the title on or whatever. And Daniel Bryan, as you say, is another prime example of Eddie's legacy. I think fans, once those sorts of things happened, I mean, I don't think there was many times in the past before this anyway, where fans had such a affinity with a superstar that was probably never really destined for the top and helped propel them there. I mean, I can't think of too many.
Yeah, affinity with a wrestler who they weren't told to necessarily have such a great affinity with.
Yeah, I mean, Bret Hart maybe, but things were different back then. Fans weren't as vocal in terms. Obviously, they didn't have the platforms that we do, or even did that with Eddie. So it's a bit different. So I think he's probably one of those first trailblazers where it comes to the fans really dictating what WWE produce. And I think people like CM Punk, Daniel Bryan, obviously, and hopefully in the future people like Kevin Owens, even Cesaro, Sami Zayn, those sorts of characters who are so well loved by all fans or most fans, but maybe aren't quite seen as top guys, can be hugely of benefit to them. So I think that legacy will always be something that Eddie Guerrero
his legacy will live on.
Yeah, for sure.
And all I've got to say, the last things I've got to say about Eddie Guerrero.
Great music. For those of you who can't see us on camera, we're just sitting there jamming.
A great theme tune.
And he knew how to make an entrance.
Yeah, and he generally had pretty good theme tunes throughout. Only one I didn't like was when he turned heel earlier. That stupid ringtone ringing one at the start was really fucking loud in your ears. I'm glad that one didn't last that long. But yeah, I think that basically sums up this week's episode. Quite refreshing to talk about a character that we don't get to talk about, and I think that was a pretty good discussion in the end.
Yeah, I think we could talk for hours about legacy for people like Eddie Guerrero. So it's good to give him some airtime.
Yeah. So well done, Randomiser, for picking that one out for us.
I think that was a Matt topic as well. That one, wasn't it?
That was one of Matt's one, yeah.
Well done, Matt. What should we do with the rest of the wheel? Do we want to replace it with a topic?
Well, I don't know. Let's see. Should we add one in now? Has anyone's got anything that they want to
Hardcore
add off
wrestling.
the top of their head?
Hardcore wrestling.
wrestling.
I mean, topical
Well,
given the announcement on AEW.
Yes,
the new match.
that's why I
Moxley
brought it
and
up.
Well, we have got gimmick matches as a category. Don't know if we want to.
I think we
group
can
it in
talk
that
about-
or...
I think we can talk about hardcore for an episode.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, all right. Fuck it, let's add it in there then.
Adding it now.
So that's what we'll do. We won't do one of these randomizer episodes every week. We'll do them kind of as and when we feel like, or when we've not got anything in particular to talk about. So
Which could be quite often.
yeah, so I'm saying
It's not like that
you'll
we've just had a
probably see it next
takeover. It's not like we just had a takeover or elimination chamber as this week.
week. Yeah,
I think maybe next week we'll talk about Elimination Chamber and we'll talk about Takeover because I think it was too good not to mention.
Good point. Takeover was brilliant.
it was very good, and, very worthy of an episode. So I think next week we'll do a half and half. We'll do a belated Takeover Vengeance Day and Elimination Chamber and the Fallout and what that means potentially for WrestleMania, as it's the next pay-per-view after this time next week. That's the next pay-per-view.
Hopefully we'll have had a Raw after that as well so we can see.
Yeah, well,
maybe
Ed
some
said
more.
he's not going to make any of his decisions until after Elimination Chamber, so it might be that Raw that we might get something, although
might
I think
find
it'll
out.
probably be SmackDown.
And then I can talk about what I think is going to happen at Mania.
Oh, Matt's got his plans already. I've literally got enough. I don't even know what match is going to happen at WrestleMania, let alone what actually is going to happen. So yeah, I think we'll leave it there. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Whatever you're doing, we really appreciate it. You can find us as a whole on Twitter at _PWP, which is the same also over on Instagram. You can find me on Twitter if you want to talk to me, although I don't really talk about wrestling on there. I talk about barely anything. At Aiden Bunker on Twitter, and same with Instagram, but I don't post there either. Ali?
Likewise, I don't really talk about wrestling on my Twitter, so there's no point interacting with me. But if you want to, it's at Ali
Unless
Bunker.
you're a Spurs fan, then follow us.
Hey, yeah, because we got some takes.
A Tottenham Hotspur fan, not San Antonio Spurs, because then you'll also be disappointed.
Yeah, we know.
You'll be very disappointed in that. I mean, if you want to see me wind people up on Twitter, it's at the Bear and Bumby. Don't go
Blocked
to
by
my
anybody
Instagram.
recently?
Say again?
Been blocked by anybody recently?
No, still only JBL, I think.
So we could probably do an episode on or a segment every week of who's Matt been blocked by.
I did get that kid chucked off Twitter though.
How's
His
it
account's
been?
been suspended.
It happens all the time, I think.
Stalker.
I think he just ends up creating new ones all the time.
Yeah, I think he's at way more than 10 at this point, but
I'll be there just to wind him up. Yeah, I mean,
So,
don't go onto
the man
my
of the people.
don't go onto my Instagram. It's a bit too lovey-dovey on my Instagram. To be fair. No one wants to see that.
Ain't nobody got time for that. So yes, like we said, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week for our Elimination Chamber and Takeover reviews.
Ciao.